My daughter's wedding day was meant to be a culmination, a shared journey's peak. Instead, she chose to bypass me, asserting her fiancé's affluent stepfather presented a more advantageous image. I took my place silently in the furthest pew, a quiet observer. 2 years later, the tide turned, and she sought me out. What transpired, then, was far from what anyone might have predicted. I will recount the entire narrative. First, my heartfelt appreciation for your continued presence. Your support means a great deal. If these narratives resonate with you, please consider subscribing to this channel. A quick note on where you're tuning in from would be wonderful. We might just give you a special mention in our next story. Today, our shout-out goes to Samuel Spencer, hailing from Chicago. We're so pleased you find joy in our tales. Now, let us delve into the story. It's often said a daughter's initial devotion belongs to her father. I once embraced that belief, wearing it like a protective layer against life's harshest blows. After her mother's passing, it was just Julian Maxwell and his daughter, Amelia. I was 37, a fresh widower, standing in a hushed hospital corridor, a newborn nestled in one arm, a diaper bag I barely understood how to operate slung over the other. In that moment, I made a silent vow. You will never want for anything, not as long as I draw breath. For 28 years, I upheld that promise. I didn't enroll her in exclusive academies or present her with unearned luxuries. But I was present at every school recital, every math tutoring session, every scraped knee and shattered youthful heart. I packed her daily meals. I taught her to navigate the roads. I meticulously crafted her first bookshelf by hand. She addressed me as Daddy until her college years. And even when that softened to Dad, I could still discern the genuine warmth in her gaze. Yet, as time flowed, that warmth subtly morphed into calculation. She began to appraise affection by the metrics of wealth, social standing, and influence, commodities I did not trade in. I wasn't impoverished, far from it. My bespoke carpentry and furniture restoration business thrived. I'd built it from the ground up, paid off my home ahead of schedule, maintained a robust savings, and invested prudently. But I wasn't ostentatious. No high-end designer watches, no leased European sports cars, no exclusive networking galas. Just a man who toiled, found solace in books at dusk, and believed he was imparting lessons of integrity. Or so I had thought. The shift began to crystallize around the time she grew serious with Bartholomew Evans, her fiancé. The first occasion I encountered him, he mockingly referred to me as the artisan, a jest I found entirely devoid of humor. Amelia didn't laugh either, but neither did she rise to my defense. That was the first subtle red flag I quietly folded and tucked away. The second emerged during a dinner gathering at Bartholomew's stepfather's sprawling modern villa. They called it a villa, as if we were transplanted to the Italian countryside. Gleaming marble floors, effervescent champagne towers, and conversations that echoed the self-congratulatory notes of professional resumes. That evening, Amelia barely acknowledged my presence. She was too preoccupied clinging to the arm of her future and performing for his circle of financiers, associates, and kin. She introduced me once. This is my father, Julian. He's got some custom woodcraft venture. A custom woodcraft venture. As if I were a mere footnote to her meticulously curated narrative. But nothing could have prepared me for what followed. We were seated on my back porch one languid Sunday afternoon. She sipping iced tea, I nursing a cool beer when she articulated it. No precursor, no measured build-up. Dad, she began, I wanted to discuss the wedding. All right, I responded, straightening my posture. She averted her gaze, tracing patterns on the condensation of her glass. We've been discussing it, and well, we think it would present a more favorable impression if Bartholomew's stepfather walked me down the aisle. I blinked. A more favorable impression? It's simply about optics, you know. He's incredibly well-connected. Many prominent individuals will be in attendance. She did not meet my eyes as she spoke. I couldn't discern if her avoidance stemmed from guilt or arrogance. Likely a confluence of both. I didn't raise my voice, didn't utter a single curse. I simply set my beer glass down and fixed my gaze upon her. So, after raising you single-handedly for 28 years, I am deemed insufficient to escort you down the aisle because I lack boardroom seats and yacht club affiliations? It's not like that, she mumbled. No, I said, rising to my feet. It is precisely like that. You are diminishing my worth because I failed to align with the image you wish to project. She finally looked at me then, defensive, her eyes nearly brimming. I'm not diminishing your worth. It's just one segment of one day. No, I repeated. It is a choice, a public declaration. And every choice carries a consequence. She crossed her arms. Why are you making this about yourself? I let out a low, bitter laugh. You have just rendered your entire wedding ceremony a display of social standing, and you question why I am taking it personally. She offered no reply. I could have pleaded. I could have reminded her who taught her to ride a bicycle, who burned the midnight oil assisting with college applications, who worked double shifts when she required braces. But I did not. I simply turned and re-entered the house, retrieved the envelope I had meticulously labeled Amelia's wedding fund from my filing cabinet, and with a thick black marker, scrawled across it, canceled. I am not a man who accepts second-tier treatment from those I have raised. When the wedding day dawned, I offered no protest. I donned my finest charcoal suit, meticulously polished my shoes, and sat quietly in the last pew, alone, watching her being escorted down the aisle by a man who, after a prior dinner, had once attempted to pitch me a convoluted legacy investment package. People murmured, casting glances back at me as if I were the eccentric relative who had missed a crucial memo. I paid them no mind. I watched, but I did not smile. She did not look at me once. Later, during the reception, she approached me for a fleeting 30 seconds, just long enough to offer a brief, almost clinical embrace and murmur, "Thank you for understanding." I did not respond. I simply looked at her and nodded, not in agreement, but in a gesture of definitive closure. She departed before I could articulate it, but the words sat sharp on my tongue. You made your decision, and now I am making mine. That night, back in my quiet home, I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, clicked open my old leather-bound atlas, and booked a 3-week journey through Italy, France, and Spain. The funds I had diligently saved for her extravagant cake, her exquisite gown, her dream venue, they were now unequivocally mine. She had made it unequivocally clear I was not a character in her fairy tale, and I had no intention of becoming a mere footnote in someone else's fantasy. They often assert that weddings are solely for the bride, but let us not delude ourselves into believing that it's the complete narrative. A wedding is a broadcast, a public pronouncement of who holds significance, who does not, and who fits the desired image. Amelia did not merely choose to walk down the aisle with another man. She chose to reframe her origin story. She excised me from the spotlight and created space for someone more luminous, more photogenic, more affluent. It was not merely a slight. It was a comprehensive rewrite. And I sat there, a silent footnote in the back row, watching my own daughter meticulously erase my headline. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my custom. I parked in the gravel overflow lot, having been denied a reserved space. I walked past sleek luxury SUVs and men in pastel-tailored suits, women with elegantly bared shoulders and perfectly positioned sunglasses. No one greeted me, not a single familiar face. I didn't anticipate a red carpet, but I would have welcomed basic human courtesy. The usher barely acknowledged the card I presented him. Julian Maxwell, father of the bride. He then directed me to the last pew on the bride's side. No front row seating, no recognition, merely a nod and a dismissive gesture, as if I were being seated in a restaurant where I clearly did not belong. I straightened my jacket, maintained a neutral expression, and took my seat. The ceremony commenced 10 minutes behind schedule. The music was classical, piped in through cleverly concealed speakers, undoubtedly curated by a wedding planner commanding a multi-thousand-dollar fee. I watched guests fawn over one another, adjusting ties, snapping discreet photos, and then the music swelled. She emerged from the back of the church, arm in arm with the man she had selected, Bartholomew's stepfather, Walter Radcliffe. He was tall, impeccably silver-haired, draped in a custom-tailored tuxedo. The sort of man who exuded the scent of legacy and diversified portfolios. The congregation murmured with admiration. I watched her smile, not the genuine, crinkled-nose smile she had given me as a child, but a polished, practiced one, as though she were already posing for Modern Bride magazine. She looked radiant, certainly, but distant. Her arm did not tremble. Her eyes did not sweep the pews in search of me. I might as well have been a stranger on the street. Walter leaned in and whispered something before he relinquished her hand. She laughed a little too loudly, a touch performative. My hands tightened around the program. The vows were elaborate, theatrical. Bartholomew pledged a life of boundless abundance and elevation. She, in turn, promised unwavering devotion and impeccable elegance. There was nothing raw, nothing authentic, merely a pair of resumes being read aloud. When the officiant declared, "You may kiss the bride," people applauded as if a difficult task had been successfully completed. After the ceremony, I lingered apart. I was not invited into the family photographs. I was not drawn into the receiving line. A few individuals offered awkward smiles, unsure whether to inquire about my identity or simply move along. One woman leaned towards me and remarked, "You must be with catering." I did not correct her. I simply nodded and headed towards the parking lot, but Amelia intercepted me before I could depart. She moved swiftly, her gown hiked slightly to prevent tripping on her heels. Her expression hovered somewhere between residual guilt and dismissiveness. "Dad," she said, enveloping me in a half-hug that felt more like choreographed motion than genuine affection. "Thank you for coming." I met her gaze. Of course. Wouldn't have missed it. She hesitated, her eyes darting. "I know it was a bit last minute with the change. We thought it made sense." "You made your choice," I stated evenly. "I hope you understand. It was never personal." "Oh, it was entirely personal," I corrected. "But I understand perfectly well." She stiffened. "It was one moment." "No," I said, "it was the moment. And you willingly relinquished it." She blinked, as though I had struck her. But I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply turned towards my truck and left her standing there, the wind tugging at her veil, as if even the elements urged her to reconsider. That night at home, I settled at the old cherrywood desk. The same one I had sanded and refinished after her first ambitious art project inadvertently marred it in middle school. I poured a glass of robust red wine, opened my laptop, and navigated to my travel bookmarks. Italy first, then Spain, perhaps Greece. I had no fixed duration for my absence, but I knew precisely how much I had amassed. $42,700. Every single penny had originally been designated for her dream wedding. Now, it was unequivocally mine. A week later, the wedding photographs appeared online. Her social media feeds were inundated with images. Her laughing alongside Walter, arms intertwined with Bartholomew, champagne flute in hand, golden sunlight caressing the edge of her designer gown. No trace of me, not even a faint presence in the background. And that was when it solidified. This was no oversight or misunderstanding. This was her conscious reshaping of her life's narrative. She wasn't merely excluding me from a single day. She was systematically erasing me from the entire story because I did not fit the aesthetic, because I refused to play the game, because being nurtured by a blue-collar father who instilled loyalty and discipline was not as photogenic as being the perceived heir to immense wealth and polished connections. I made no calls, sent no texts. I did not send a gift or inquire about her honeymoon. I had nothing further to articulate. Instead, for weeks later, I mailed myself a postcard from Rome. On the reverse, I inscribed, "Living the life your father provided is one thing. Erasing him from it is another." I did not dispatch it to her. I affixed it to my refrigerator. 23 months had elapsed since the wedding. I remembered the duration precisely because I marked the date by my position on a weathered stone balcony in Córdoba, observing the rooftops blush gold beneath the late Spanish sun. I had ceased tracking her life, her digital updates, her meticulously curated posts, her seemingly perfect marriage. I reasoned that if she desired my absence, she could have it on her terms. I did not dwell. I did not brood. I simply removed myself from the unfolding narrative. My days grew quieter, yet they were not hollow. I spent my mornings in the wood shop, meticulously refinishing antique chairs and experimenting with intricate walnut joinery. I embarked on invigorating hikes with a companion from my cycling group, engaged in chess matches at the park, and engaged in gentle flirtations with a captivating widow named Josephine Thorne at the local co-op. It was not the life I had envisioned at 65, but it was undeniably mine, and I savored its newfound tranquility. Then, the voicemail arrived. I was on a back porch, meticulously oiling my work boots, when I discerned the subtle buzz from my phone on the windowsill. One missed call. No name, merely a number I had not saved. A minute later, the voicemail alert chimed. I permitted it to linger while I completed both boots, then wiped my hands, entered the house, and pressed play. Dad, it's me. It's Amelia. Please, just pick up. I don't know what to do. Bartholomew left. He drained everything. I went to the bank, and there was nothing. The lawyer says the prenup was airtight, and I didn't even read it. I thought I could trust him. God, I was so stupid. Please call me back. I need you. I need my dad. I stared at the screen long after the message concluded. Her voice resonated through the room as though it had been patiently awaiting this moment to re-enter my chest and nestle among old, unhealed wounds. I replayed it once more, then again, and then I pressed delete. But I did not block the number. I was not cruel, merely finished. There's a distinction. The following day, I confided in my friend, Maxwell Coleman. We were sharing coffee in his backyard, the rich aroma of freshly cut grass hanging heavily in the air. She excluded you from the most pivotal moment of her life, he remarked, without lifting his gaze from his crossword puzzle. And now she wishes to re-enter when her entire world crumbles. She sounded genuinely afraid. I admitted. He snorted. Well, choices often create a lot of noise when they collapse. I did not argue. He was not incorrect. 3 days later, she called again. I did not answer. She then sent a text message. Please, can we talk? Followed by another. I'm not asking for money. I just need a place to think. And finally, you're still my dad. That has to mean something. I contemplated that last message for a protracted period. It is curious how individuals perceive titles as granting unconditional access, as if being a daughter bestows permanent admission regardless of one's conduct. I genuinely do not believe she ever conceived that I might refuse, because for 28 years I never had. That weekend, I drove out to a serene lake where I used to take her when she was a little girl. We would skip stones, observe dragonflies alighting on lily pads, and share peanut butter sandwiches with apple slices on the side. I sat on the very same bench we used to claim every Sunday, now smooth and softened by the relentless caress of time. I allowed myself to remember, not the carefully curated past she attempted to obliterate, but the authentic one, the one where I was the sole individual holding the entire fragile structure together. Upon my return home, I returned her call. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with hopeful anticipation. Dad, you can come by? I stated. Tomorrow. For 1 hour. She did not request more time. She understood the implicit boundary. When she arrived, she seemed diminished. Not physically, although she had evidently lost some weight, but in the way her presence used to command a room. She wore dark sunglasses, and her hair was pulled back into a simple, low bun. Her designer coat contrasted sharply with her worn sneakers. She sat down at the kitchen table and surveyed the surroundings as though she half expected the house to have undergone some fundamental transformation in her absence. It had not, just as I had not. I'm sorry, she began, but I raised a hand. I did not invite you here for apologies, I stated. I invited you here for clarity. She blinked. Okay. You deliberately excluded me, I said calmly. You edited me out. And now you are here because you have exhausted all other options. Do not mistake desperation for reconciliation. She flinched. I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe you still had that fund. I nodded. I did. 42,000. It's gone. Her eyes widened. Gone. Indeed. I spent on myself. Traveled. Invested further in my shop. Had an exceptionally good time doing so. She stared at the table, visibly stunned. I possessed that money because I believed implicitly in your future. But the day you handed another man my inherent role, I ceased believing you acknowledged my place in yours. I made a mistake, she whispered. You made a choice, I corrected. And now so have I. She bit her lip, tears welling. I have nowhere to go. You possess a name, and you once married into significant wealth. You will undoubtedly devise a solution. But I'm your daughter. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. And I was your father until you rendered me a stranger in your own story. She stood abruptly, blinking rapidly. Is this truly who you are now, Julian? No, I stated. This is who I have always been. You simply ceased perceiving it when you began pursuing fleeting reflections. She departed without another utterance. No embrace, no slamming door, just a profound silence. And for the first time in 2 years, it felt as though she was finally truly hearing me. A week elapsed. No calls, no texts, no midnight apologies or half-formed explanations typed, and subsequently deleted in a swirling vortex of guilt. Just silence. And for the first time since this entire ordeal commenced, I was not anticipating the silence to shatter. I did not compulsively check my phone. I did not replay old voicemails or reread old messages. I permitted the quiet to remain. Then, on a Wednesday morning, beneath gray skies, with cold coffee at hand, I heard a knock at the door. Not a frantic one. Not the kind one would expect from someone in sheer desperation. No, this was slow or measured. She knew I would be home. She knew I would answer. I opened it to find her standing there in a blazer 2 sizes too large, makeup smudged beneath tired eyes, a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. She did not resemble Amelia, not the polished, curated version she had perfected over the preceding years. She looked like the girl who used to drift off to sleep on the living room rug watching Disney movies, merely older, more hollowed out. I don't wish to stay, she articulated immediately. I just wanted to speak in person. I stepped aside and motioned her inward. She entered like a tentative guest, not a daughter returning home. She did not ask to retreat to her old room. She did not gravitate towards the refrigerator as she once had. She seated herself at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and waited. I poured us both coffee, black, no sugar, precisely the way I taught her. She used to despise it. I slid the mug across the table without a word, then took my seat opposite her. State what you came to say. She swallowed. I'm not asking for money. Good. I wanted to understand. I know you're angry. Stop. I interjected firmly. Do not reduce this to mere anger. I'm not angry. I am resolved. She blinked, caught off guard. Resolved. I have accepted what you are, what you did, and what you valued. She looked down into her cup. I was stupid. No. I corrected. You were strategic. Do not cheapen it with false humility. That statement visibly affected her. She leaned back, staring at me. So what now? We're just strangers. I wouldn't characterize us as strangers, I mused. Strangers are neutral. You made choices that deliberately removed me from your inner circle. That is not neutral. That is deliberate. She appeared as though she wished to retort, but there was no foundation upon which to stand. Not anymore. I saved for you. I recounted, my voice even. For your life, for your future. I constructed a financial cushion so you would never have to endure too hard a fall. And when it mattered most, when you had the opportunity to honor that commitment, you replaced me. Not privately, not reluctantly, but publicly, eagerly. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought I was building a better life. You were constructing a stage, and you determined I did not belong upon it. She shook her head slowly. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, I conceded. But consequences, they are fair. She lapsed into silence once more. I could discern that she was unaccustomed to conversations where she was not being soothed or rescued. That had invariably been my role. The steady hand, the soft landing. I realized in that moment, perhaps for the very first time, that I had never taught her how to experience loss without a safety net beneath her. That responsibility fell squarely on me. Do you love me at all? She inquired. And for a fleeting instant, I saw the little girl again. Not the socialite, not the wife, just my daughter. Of course, I love you, I affirmed. But love does not equate to indulgence. Love implies boundaries. Love signifies truth. She nodded slowly. I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. Then, she reached in her bag and produced a thin envelope. I discovered this in one of Bartholomew's drawers before he departed. I hesitated before accepting it. Inside was a photograph. Myself and her, perhaps 8 years old, seated in my truck, eating fast food after one of her swim meets. She had ketchup on her cheek and was proudly displaying her medal. I looked utterly exhausted, but undeniably proud. He kept this. I inquired. She shrugged. Perhaps it reminded him of what he was up against. I stared at the photograph for a protracted period, not because I yearned for that specific moment, but because I realized it might have been the last time she truly regarded me with awe. She then stood, slowly. I should go. I escorted her to the door. No embrace, no declarations of forgiveness, just a mutual recognition of an altered reality. Take care of yourself, I offered. You too, she replied. And then she departed again. But this time I did not feel gutted. I felt profoundly grounded. That night, I poured a glass of bourbon and opened my journal. Not the kind filled with tear-streaked entries or dramatic flourish, but a simple ledger of thoughts and truths. I wrote, "Today my daughter asked if I loved her. I do, but that is not synonymous with trusting her. And it is certainly not synonymous with forgetting. I cannot rewrite her story, but I can write the remainder of mine." I closed the journal and slept soundly through the night. The fallout materialized slowly, like a subtle leak beneath the surface that goes unnoticed until the very foundation begins to shift. Initially, it was a few oblique comments from extended family. My cousin, Morella Castillo, messaged me a vague, "Heard about Amelia. Hope everything's okay." Then my ex-sister-in-law, Diana Sanders, who hadn't exchanged more than 2 words with me since Amelia's graduation, called out of the blue. "Julian," she began, "I just think perhaps you're being a touch harsh." I was standing in the aisle of a lumberyard, holding a set of replacement hinges for a pantry cabinet, when she uttered those words. I stared at the phone in my hand as though it had sprouted horns. "She's your daughter," Diana continued. "She's been through a great deal. People make mistakes." I was unaware that publicly replacing your parent at your own wedding qualified as a mere mistake. I interjected. A heavy silence settled on the other end of the line. "She was young, Julian," Diana offered softly. "Caught up. She was 28, I stated flatly. "Not 18. Old enough to make choices. Old enough to bear the consequences." "Fine," she snapped. "But at some point, you're going to look around and realize you're entirely alone." I offered a small, bitter smile. "I'm not alone. I simply finally see surrounding myself with individuals who conflate unconditional love with unconditional access." She hung up after that, and I remained standing in the middle of the lumberyard, my hands still clutching the hinges, feeling the familiar throb behind my right temple. It was always thus, people urging you to forgive, not because they genuinely believed in healing, but because your boundaries rendered them uncomfortable. Over the subsequent weeks, the commentary emanated from all directions. My sister emailed me a lengthy, emotional plea concerning the intrinsic value of family and how clinging to resentment poisons the well. I did not respond. A neighbor dropped by with a surplus of tomatoes and casually mentioned Amelia had reached out to her simply to say hello. I nodded, thanked her for the produce, and closed the door before she could introduce any further topics. But the one conversation that truly resonated was not from someone attempting to pull me back into her orbit. It originated from a young man named Elias Turner, a tenant residing in the back unit of the duplex I owned. He was 29, worked for a courier service, and played guitar in a bar band on weekends. We weren't intimately close, but he had assisted me with snow shoveling on a few occasions and once lent me a wrench when mine mysteriously vanished mid-project. One evening, he observed me working in the garage and ambled over, his hands tucked into his hoodie pocket. "Mind if I hang out for a minute?" he inquired. I shrugged. "Long day." He leaned against the workbench. "My old man called today. First time in 6 years." I offered no verbal response. I simply continued smoothing down a board with my orbital sander. He abandoned me when I was a kid, relocated 3 states away, started a new family. No calls, no birthday wishes, nothing. Then today he dispatches this idiotic text message like, "Hey bud, thinking of you. Let's talk sometime." I deactivated the sander, wiped the fine dust from the edge of the bench. "What did you do?" He looked down at the concrete floor. "I deleted it." "Good." He appeared surprised. "You think so?" "Yes," I affirmed. Sometimes distance is the healthiest boundary one can establish. Blood ties do not inherently constitute family. Behavior does. He nodded slowly, processing my words. "You understand?" I met his gaze for a long beat. "I understand more than I ever wished I did." And that was the extent of our exchange. After he departed, I remained in the garage for a while longer, contemplating the profound irony of it all. I used to believe that being a good father meant being perpetually available. But perhaps being a good man entailed recognizing precisely when to firmly close the damn door. That weekend, I sat at my desk and opened a folder labeled estate planning. It was long overdue. Inside were documents I had not reviewed in 2 years, beneficiary designations, asset distributions, contingency clauses. I struck Amelia's name from the sole inheritor position, not out of vengeance, nor even spite, but out of stark realism. Instead, I reallocated 50% of my estate to a youth mentorship program I had quietly supported over the years, an organization that provided structure, discipline, and a consistent presence to children without fathers. The remaining half I left open. Perhaps I would encounter someone new. Perhaps Elias. Perhaps someone I hadn't even crossed paths with yet. What truly mattered was that my legacy would not be squandered on someone who perceived me as a mere accessory to her meticulously curated life. That night, I received a text message from Amelia. Just a single line, "You really cut me out of your will." I did not respond. I sat on the porch, savoring a cigar, watching the sky transmute into velvet, the stars beginning to emerge like tiny, unhidden truths. She was observing me through mutual contacts, through whispered exchanges, perhaps even directly, but it held no consequence. She was beginning to learn what I had already lived. When one gambles with another's loyalty, sometimes the house wins, and sometimes the house remembers. There exists a distinct stillness that accompanies finality. Not the tumultuous crash of an ending, but the serene quiet that descends once you cease anticipating a knock at the door. That was precisely where I resided. Not embittered, not brooding, merely still. I had painstakingly rebuilt a life, brick by deliberate brick. And this time, I ensured the foundation was not sustained by anyone's approval but my own. Summer had arrived, heavy and slow. I spent most mornings on the porch with my coffee, my boots propped on the railing, observing the street gradually awaken. Children pedaled past. The mail truck wheezed its way down the block, and my tenant, Elias, strummed his guitar in the backyard whenever he had a day off. Peace had become a comforting routine, not something I pursued, but simply something I inhabited. I hadn't received any communication from Amelia in almost a month. No texts, no calls. The silence was no longer deafening. It simply was. I imagined she was rebuilding her life, perhaps renting a modest dwelling, maybe tentatively venturing into the job market for the first time in years. The peculiar truth about losing everything is that it either utterly devastates you or imbues you with an unyielding resilience. I hoped she would discover some measure of that grit, but it was no longer my concern. One Saturday morning, I drove out to the coast. Not for any grand symbolic reason, but simply because the forecast predicted 78 degrees and clear skies, and I suddenly realized I hadn't stood by the ocean in over a year. I took the scenic route, winding country roads, pine trees standing like silent sentinels on either side, curving bends that compelled you to slow down and truly absorb your surroundings. I parked at a trailhead I hadn't visited since Amelia was 12. Back then, she would whine about the insects, demand piggyback rides halfway up the bluff. But when we reached the overlook, she would gasp and declare, "It looks like the whole world ends here." She wasn't wrong. I ascended the trail alone this time, my knees reminding me I was no longer 30, but still robust enough to persevere. At the summit, I stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the Pacific crash into the jagged rocks with an eternal rhythm and fury. I inhaled deeply the salty air and the eucalyptus-scented wind weaving through my jacket, and I permitted myself to remember not the betrayals, not the subsequent fallout, but simply her unadulterated laugh. Her tiny fingers wrapped securely around mine. The way she would fall asleep in the truck after long drives, her head resting against the window, trust etched across her face as though carved in stone. "I did love you right," I whispered. "Even if you ceased loving me, well, it wasn't forgiveness. Not precisely, just a clear recognition of what was and what would never again be." A woman nearby, perhaps in her mid-50s, her gray braid cascading down her back, stood beside me for a while without uttering a word. She eventually looked over and remarked, "First time here?" I shook my head. "Used to come a long time ago." She nodded slowly. "It's often good to return to places, to observe what has changed and what has remained constant." We did not exchange names. We had no need to. That night, I returned home and discovered a letter in my mailbox. Not a text message, not a call, but a genuine letter, stamped and sealed, addressed in Amelia's distinctive handwriting. I carried it inside, poured a glass of water, and seated myself at the kitchen table before breaking the seal. It was brief. "Dad, I've been angry, not at you, but at myself for trading something solid for something merely shiny. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't either. I just want you to know I see it now. All of it. What you gave, what I willingly gave up. I'm not asking to return. I just hope that someday you'll think of me and feel proud again. Amelia. I stared at that final line for considerable duration. Proud. The truth was, I had been once. Not because of her accomplishments or her carefully constructed image, but simply because she had been mine, my girl. And even when she evolved into someone I no longer recognized, I never ceased hoping she would ultimately find her true path again. I did not write back. Not because I lacked concern, but because I had already articulated everything I needed to. I had embodied the truth loudly enough that she had eventually heard it, even in the profound quiet that followed. A few weeks later, I updated the estate plan once more. I did not reinstate her entirely, but I allocated a portion to her, a modest trust designed to mature in 10 years if specific benchmarks were successfully met. It was not a reward. It was a clear reminder. People can indeed change, but they must undertake that transformation on their own terms. One Sunday, Elias assisted me in replacing the front gate. And when we finished, we sat on the porch, enjoying beers and sandwiches. You ever think she'll come back? He inquired. Perhaps, I responded. But if she does, it won't be through the front door until she is someone who knocks, not merely assumes. He nodded. That's fair. And it was. The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the yard. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes sang a low, steady melody. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the significant weight of everything and the surprising lightness of finally letting it go. She didn't merely walk away from me that day at the altar. She walked toward the version of life where affection was conditional on outward appearances. And I permitted her. I did not chase. I did not plead. I allowed her to live out the version of herself she believed would hold greater consequence. And when it inevitably crumbled, I did not gloat. I simply stood still, because sometimes being the man who remains standing when others fall, that is the quietest form of triumph.